Prayer is not a plea sent into a distant sky. It is a living conversation between the soul and the infinite presence that already knows every longing of the heart. True prayer begins when the restlessness of desire is refined into the calm intensity of devotion, when words soften into feeling and feeling ripens into certainty. In that sacred certainty, the soul learns that God does not answer prayers according to human impatience, but according to divine law, wisdom, and perfect timing. To pray rightly is to align thought, breath, and will with that law, so that the answer is not forced but invited. Most people pray with lips alone, while the mind wanders and the heart doubts. Such prayer carries little magnetism. Effective prayer gathers the scattered rays of attention and focuses them into a single beam of faith. When attention becomes steady, prayer acquires power. The soul then speaks in a language God understands, not the language of fear or bargaining, but the language of calm trust and inner listening. For every true prayer has two movements, the outgoing call of devotion and the receptive silence that follows. Without silence, prayer is incomplete, for God's answers are often felt before they are heard. To receive answers, one must first prepare the inner temple. Agitation clouds perception, serenity clarifies it. When the body is still and the breath is gentle, the mind naturally turns inward. In that inwardness, intuition awakens. Answers may come as sudden understanding, as strength replacing weakness, as peace dissolving anxiety. The answer may not match the form the mind demanded, yet it always matches the soul's true need. Divine wisdom reshapes requests, lifting them from narrow personal desire into broader spiritual benefit. Prayer is most potent when it is continuous, not confined to moments of distress. It becomes a state of remembrance carried into work, relationships, and solitude. When the heart remembers God during action, actions themselves become prayers. When challenges arise, they are met not with complaint, but with deeper trust. Such prayer transforms circumstances by first transforming consciousness. The outer world then rearranges itself according to the changed inner state. Faith is the channel through which answers flow. Faith is not blind belief. It is the soul's memory of its divine origin. As faith deepens, doubt weakens, and prayer ceases to be an experiment. The devotee begins to expect guidance as naturally as light follows sunrise. Even when answers are delayed, faith remains unshaken, knowing that divine silence is also a form of response, urging greater patience, greater depth, greater surrender. In the highest prayer, there is no asking at all. There is only communion, an offering of love without conditions. In that love, the soul realizes that God has always been answering, through intuition, through conscience, through the quiet joy that arises when the heart rests in the eternal presence, listening, trusting, and allowing the divine will to reveal itself moment by moment. Prayer begins as an inner movement of awareness rather than an outward act of speech. It is the soul turning its attention toward its own source, recognizing that the divine presence is not distant but intimately near, nearer than breath, nearer than thought. When prayer is understood as a living inner conversation, the sense of separation dissolves. One no longer imagines sending requests across vast spiritual distances, but feels the gentle immediacy of being heard even before the words are fully formed. In this awareness, prayer becomes natural, spontaneous, and continuous. Like the quiet dialogue between a river and the ocean, it is destined to reach. Most human appeals to God are shaped by habit and urgency. They arise from fear, need, or desperation, and they often carry the unconscious assumption that God must be persuaded or reminded. Inner prayer removes this assumption. It recognizes that divine intelligence already knows the condition of the heart and the lessons required for its growth. The purpose of prayer then shifts from demanding outcomes to aligning consciousness. As the mind becomes attuned to divine order, the heart begins to speak more honestly, without exaggeration or pretense, and the soul listens as much as it speaks. An inner conversation requires sincerity, and sincerity demands awareness. When prayer is only verbal, the mind can easily wander while the lips continue their routine. But when prayer is inward, attention must be present. The one who prays becomes aware of subtle feelings, hidden motives, and unspoken longings. In this awareness, prayer purifies itself. Requests that arise from ego soften, while deeper aspirations emerge, such as the longing for clarity, strength, understanding, and peace. The soul learns to recognize which desires lead toward harmony and which bind it to restlessness. This living conversation is not limited to moments of solitude. It continues through daily activity as a quiet remembrance. While walking, working, or speaking, the heart maintains a gentle inward connection, like a thread of awareness tying every action to the divine witness within. In this state, prayer is no longer an interruption of life but its underlying rhythm. Challenges become opportunities to deepen the conversation. Confusion invites inward inquiry. Joy becomes gratitude expressed without words. Even silence itself becomes prayer when it is filled with awareness. As prayer becomes inward, it also becomes more subtle. Answers are no longer expected as dramatic signs or sudden miracles, but as shifts in perception. Guidance may arise as an intuitive nudge, a calm certainty, or a new understanding that quietly replaces confusion. The soul learns to trust these subtle responses because they carry a distinct quality of peace. They do not agitate or flatter the ego. They steady the mind and broaden perspective. Through repeated experience, the devotee recognizes that the divine speaks most clearly when the mind is quiet enough to listen. An inner conversation with God also transforms the sense of identity. Instead of feeling like a separate being appealing to a higher power, the individual begins to sense participation in a greater consciousness. Prayer then becomes less about changing circumstances and more about changing one's relationship to them. Difficulties are met with increased inner strength. Delays are met with patience rather than frustration. The soul begins to understand that divine answers often reshape the questioner before reshaping the situation. This form of prayer deepens faith naturally. Faith is no longer sustained by belief alone, but by experience. Each moment of inward communion reinforces the certainty that one is not alone, that guidance is constant, and that even apparent silence carries meaning. The inner dialogue continues through emotional highs and lows, teaching the soul that divine presence is not conditional upon mood or success. In sorrow, prayer becomes comfort. In confusion, it becomes light. In clarity, it becomes gratitude. Over time, the living conversation matures into companionship. God is no longer approached only as a giver of boons, but as an ever-present friend within. This companionship brings dignity to life, for every thought and action is lived in awareness of that presence. The soul feels witnessed and supported, yet also gently guided toward higher standards of truth and compassion. Inner prayer refines character not through force, but through loving awareness that naturally inclines the heart toward harmony. As the conversation deepens, words gradually lose their importance. Feeling becomes the primary language. A single thought, offered with depth, carries more power than many spoken sentences. The heart learns to communicate through devotion itself, through the steady offering of attention and trust. In this state, prayer becomes effortless. It no longer requires special posture or time because it flows from identity rather than effort. One does not enter prayer, one leaves within it. This continuous inner prayer reveals that God's nearness was never absent, only unnoticed. The act of turning inward removes the illusion of distance. Each moment of awareness strengthens the connection until prayer and life are no longer separate experiences but one seamless movement of consciousness toward truth, toward peace, toward the quiet joy of communion that unfolds endlessly within the power of prayer, is determined not by the number of words spoken, but by the quality of attention behind them. Attention is the current that carries thought toward manifestation. When attention is scattered, prayer becomes weak and uncertain, like light diffused through fog. When attention is focused, prayer becomes concentrated, magnetic, and alive. Focused attention gathers the wandering energies of the mind and directs them toward a single spiritual aim. In that gathering, prayer acquires intensity, and intensity awakens power. Faith gives direction to attention. Without faith, attention wavers, questioning its own movement. Faith steadies attention and gives it momentum. It is not blind belief, but a quiet inner assurance that consciousness is supported by a higher intelligence. When faith is present, prayer is not spoken with hesitation but with calm expectancy. The heart feels that its call is already received, even if the response has not yet appeared. This expectancy charges prayer with certainty, and certainty deepens its effectiveness. Emotional sincerity is the warmth that animates prayer. Attention and faith may give structure, but sincerity gives life. A prayer spoken without feeling is like a seed placed on stone. Emotional sincerity arises when the heart is honest with itself and with God. There is no need to exaggerate devotion or hide weakness. True sincerity admits confusion, longing, doubt, and hope without self-judgment. In that honesty, prayer becomes real and reality carries power. The divine responds not to perfection of expression, but to authenticity of feeling. When attention, faith, and sincerity unite, prayer becomes an act of alignment rather than persuasion. The individual no longer tries to convince God to respond, but seeks to attune personal consciousness to divine order. In this attunement, resistance dissolves, inner conflict quiets. The mind stops arguing with life and begins cooperating with it. Prayer then feels less like effort and more like flow, a movement that carries the soul naturally toward clarity. Focused attention requires discipline but not strain. Strain tightens the mind and blocks receptivity. Gentle discipline steadies attention without force. This steadiness is cultivated through stillness, breath awareness, and conscious relaxation. As the body becomes calm, attention withdraws from restlessness and settles inward. In this settled state, prayer penetrates deeper layers of consciousness, reaching beyond surface thought into intuition. From intuition arise insights that feel complete, not fragmented. Faith strengthens through repeated inner experience. Each sincere prayer, even when unanswered in visible ways, leaves a subtle imprint of peace or understanding. These imprints accumulate, gradually transforming belief into knowing. The soul begins to trust the process of prayer itself, rather than measuring its success by immediate results. This trust removes impatience. When impatience dissolves, prayer becomes timeless, free from anxiety about when or how answers will arrive. Emotional sincerity also refines desire. At first, prayer may revolve around personal wants shaped by fear or attachment. As sincerity deepens, the heart begins to recognize the difference between fleeting cravings and genuine needs. The emotional tone of prayer shifts from urgency to depth. Instead of pleading for relief, the soul asks for strength. Instead of demanding change, it seeks understanding. These refined emotions carry greater power because they harmonize with universal principles. Focused prayer transforms the inner atmosphere. Thoughts slow down, emotional turbulence settles. In this inner clarity, one becomes more sensitive to subtle guidance. Answers may arise during prayer or afterward, appearing as sudden insight, a shift in attitude, or a quiet conviction about the next step. These answers feel natural rather than imposed. They do not excite the ego but reassure the heart. Their authority comes from calmness, not force. Faith also acts as a bridge between effort and surrender. One makes sincere effort to focus and pray, yet faith allows release of control over outcomes. This balance prevents frustration. When effort is too strong and surrender absent, prayer becomes tense. When surrender is present, effort becomes joyful. The soul offers its intention and then rests in trust, allowing divine intelligence to shape the response. This resting is not passivity but confidence. As emotional sincerity deepens, prayer becomes simpler. Words reduce themselves. The heart learns that one deeply felt thought is more powerful than many repeated phrases. Attention rests on feeling rather than form. In this simplicity, prayer feels intimate and personal. It no longer imitates others' expressions, but arises spontaneously from one's own inner state. Such prayer carries a unique vibration that resonates with truth. The combination of focused attention, faith, and sincerity gradually reshapes character. The mind becomes more centered. Emotional reactions soften. One becomes less driven by fear and more guided by inner assurance. This transformation itself is an answer to prayer, though it may not be recognized immediately. Life begins to respond differently as inner attitudes change. Circumstances reflect the steadiness cultivated within. In moments of difficulty, these qualities prevent collapse into despair. Attention keeps the mind from scattering into panic. Faith prevents the heart from closing in doubt. Sincerity allows honest expression of pain without bitterness. Together, they create resilience. Prayer becomes a refuge that does not remove challenges instantly, but gives strength to meet them with dignity and clarity. Over time, prayer infused with focused attention, faith, and sincerity ceases to feel like an isolated spiritual act. It becomes a way of meeting life. Every challenge invites deeper focus. Every uncertainty invites renewed faith. Every emotion invites greater honesty. The soul lives in a state of inward dialogue, continuously aligning itself with higher understanding, continuously refining its connection with the divine presence felt within the steady awareness of trust and devotion. Silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of deep listening. When the outer noise of the world subsides and the inner chatter of thought slows, a subtle awareness emerges that feels vast, steady, and intimate at once. This awareness is the true doorway through which divine answers are perceived. Words may initiate prayer, but silence completes it. Without silence, prayer remains a one-sided effort, the mind speaking while the heart remains unable to receive. In silence, the soul shifts from asking to listening, from effort to receptivity. Inner stillness begins with the body. A restless body encourages a restless mind. When the body is gently relaxed and the breath becomes smooth and even, the nervous system settles. This physical calm sends a message inward, inviting the mind to release its constant activity. As attention withdraws from sensory distraction, awareness turns inward. The mind may resist at first, presenting old thoughts and habits, but patient observation gradually loosens their grip. Stillness is not forced, it is allowed. As the mind quiets, silence deepens beyond mere absence of thought. A background awareness becomes noticeable, a sense of being that exists even when thoughts pause. This awareness feels alert yet peaceful. In this state, intuition awakens. Intuition does not shout, it whispers. It communicates through feeling, insight, and subtle knowing. The more the mind rests in stillness, the more clearly intuition can be perceived. Divine guidance often appears as a calm certainty rather than a dramatic revelation. Silence creates sensitivity. When the mind is noisy, subtle impressions are drowned out. In stillness, even faint inner movements are felt. One becomes aware of shifts in energy, emotion, and understanding. These shifts carry meaning. A sudden ease replacing tension may signal alignment. A gentle resistance may signal caution. Such responses arise spontaneously, without deliberate analysis. They are the language of inner guidance. Inner stillness also dissolves emotional turbulence. Many prayers are driven by agitation, fear, or urgency. When these emotions dominate, perception is distorted. Silence allows emotion to settle, revealing what lies beneath. Fear often hides a desire for security. Anger often hides hurt. In stillness, these layers become visible without judgment. This clarity itself is healing. The soul recognizes its true needs more accurately, and prayer becomes more refined. In the quiet mind, answers are not always given in words. Sometimes they come as a shift in perspective that makes a problem seem smaller or less threatening. Sometimes they come as renewed strength or patience. The absence of immediate instruction does not mean absence of response. Silence teaches that guidance can be gradual, unfolding over time rather than arriving all at once. This understanding cultivates patience and trust. Stillness also reveals the difference between mental imagination and intuitive insight. Imagination carries excitement, urgency, and emotional charge. Intuition carries calmness and simplicity. When an insight arises in stillness, it does not demand immediate action. It feels complete in itself. This quality distinguishes genuine guidance from wishful thinking. The mind learns to respect this difference through repeated practice of silence. As inner listening deepens, one becomes less dependent on external validation. The need for constant reassurance diminishes. Confidence arises from within, grounded in direct experience of inner clarity. Decisions are made with greater ease, not because all outcomes are known, but because the mind trusts its connection to guidance. This trust reduces anxiety and overthinking, allowing action to flow more naturally. Silence also cultivates humility. In stillness, the ego's narratives lose their dominance. Personal opinions and rigid identities soften. One becomes aware of a larger intelligence operating beyond individual preference. This awareness encourages surrender. Surrender is not resignation but cooperation. The individual offers personal effort while remaining open to being guided beyond personal understanding. This openness expands the range of possible answers. The doorway of silence is entered repeatedly, not once. Each return deepens familiarity. Over time, the mind learns how to settle more quickly. Stillness becomes accessible even in brief moments throughout the day. A few conscious breaths, a pause of attention, can reconnect awareness with inner quiet. In these moments, guidance continues to flow, not only during formal prayer but within daily life. Inner stillness also transforms relationships. When one listens inwardly, one listens outwardly with greater sensitivity. Reactions soften, responses become more thoughtful. Communication improves because it is informed by awareness rather than impulse. This outward harmony reflects the inner alignment cultivated through silence. Life begins to mirror the peace established within. As silence deepens, the sense of separation between seeker and answer diminishes. One realizes that the source of guidance has always been present, waiting beneath layers of noise. Prayer no longer feels like reaching towards something distant. It feels like uncovering what was already there. The act of listening becomes as sacred as the act of asking. In this continuous listening, the soul recognizes that divine answers are not confined to specific moments of prayer. They arise through intuition, conscience, insight, and even circumstance. Silence sharpens perception, so these answers are recognized when they appear. Life itself becomes a conversation conducted through awareness. Stillness does not eliminate challenge, but it changes the way challenge is experienced. Problems are met with clarity rather than panic. Uncertainty is met with openness rather than fear. The inner quiet remains steady even when outer conditions fluctuate. This steadiness becomes a foundation of spiritual strength, supporting the soul through changing circumstances while maintaining an unbroken connection to inner guidance that unfolds gently through the ever-present doorway of silence. Transformation begins within, long before it becomes visible in circumstances. The outer world is a reflection shaped by inner attitudes, beliefs, and states of consciousness. When prayer seeks to alter events without addressing the inner state that attracts and interprets those events, its effects remain limited. True prayer works from the inside outward. It first reshapes perception, then feeling, then response. As consciousness changes, life responds in corresponding ways. Most struggles are intensified by resistance. The mind reacts to difficulty by tensing, judging, and fearing, which reinforces the very conditions it seeks to escape. Prayer that transforms consciousness softens this resistance. Instead of asking for immediate removal of problems, the soul asks for clarity and strength to understand them. In that understanding, emotional reactivity diminishes. What once appeared as an overwhelming obstacle begins to look like a process with meaning and direction. Inner transformation alters interpretation. Two people may face the same circumstance and experience it entirely differently based on inner state. One sees threat, the other sees challenge. One feels victimized, the other feels guided. Prayer refines this inner lens. It gradually replaces fear with trust, confusion with insight, and resentment with acceptance. This shift does not deny difficulty but changes the way it is met. The emotional charge that once drained energy is replaced by steadiness. As consciousness transforms, habits of thought are restructured. Repeated prayerful awareness weakens old patterns of negativity and self-doubt. The mind becomes less inclined to dwell on imagined futures or unresolved pasts. Attention returns more easily to the present moment, where effective action is possible. This presence itself is transformative. It allows one to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively, creating more harmonious outcomes. Prayer that transforms consciousness also deepens responsibility. Instead of blaming external forces, one recognizes the role of inner attitude in shaping experience. This recognition is empowering rather than burdensome. It restores a sense of agency grounded in awareness. One realizes that while not all events are chosen, the response to them is. This freedom of response is a direct fruit of inner transformation. As inner resistance dissolves, intuition becomes more accessible. Guidance is perceived not as an external command, but as an inner alignment with what feels right and timely. Decisions become clearer because they arise from a calmer mind. Even when choices involve uncertainty, there is less inner conflict. The mind trusts the process of growth unfolding through experience. Transformation of consciousness also affects emotional depth. Emotions are no longer suppressed or indulged blindly. They are observed, understood, and integrated. Prayer creates a space where emotions can be felt without domination. This integration reduces inner fragmentation. The individual feels more whole, less divided between conflicting desires and fears. This wholeness radiates outward as stability and authenticity. As consciousness evolves, priorities naturally change. What once seemed urgent loses its grip. What once seemed insignificant gains meaning. The drive for constant control is replaced by cooperation with life. This shift reduces stress and struggle. Effort becomes more efficient because it is aligned with inner clarity rather than scattered by inner conflict. Outer circumstances begin to reflect these changes subtly. Relationships respond to calmer communication. Work responds to clearer focus. Opportunities appear that match the new inner state. These changes may seem coincidental, but they follow an inner logic. Life arranges itself around the consciousness engaging with it. When that consciousness is harmonious, outcomes tend to harmonize. Prayer that transforms consciousness also builds resilience. When challenges arise, they no longer shatter inner balance. The individual has learned to return inward, to realign through awareness. This capacity creates emotional stability. Difficulties are seen as temporary movements rather than permanent threats. This perspective reduces fear and preserves energy. As resilience grows, compassion deepens. Understanding one's own inner struggles fosters empathy for others. Judgment softens. The need to defend identity weakens. Prayer shifts focus from self-centered concerns to a broader awareness of shared human experience. This expansion of consciousness naturally expresses itself through kindness and patience. Transformation within also alters the experience of time. Urgency fades, there is greater acceptance of process. One becomes willing to grow gradually rather than demand instant results. This patience reduces frustration and opens space for learning. Prayer supports this patience by reinforcing trust in a larger unfolding intelligence. As inner transformation stabilizes, the distinction between prayer and daily life diminishes. Prayer is no longer confined to moments of request. It becomes a continual alignment maintained through awareness. Each experience, pleasant or challenging, is met with inward attentiveness. This attentiveness sustains growth. Outer change, when it arrives, feels natural rather than dramatic. It is experienced as a continuation of inner shifts already underway. Even when circumstances remain outwardly similar, the experience of them is profoundly different. The inner transformation has already altered their meaning. This inward change also clarifies purpose. Life feels less random and more coherent. Events are understood as part of a larger pattern of development. Prayer becomes a way of participating consciously in that pattern rather than resisting it. The soul moves with life instead of against it. As consciousness continues to transform, attachment to specific outcomes loosens. One learns to value growth over comfort, understanding over control. This valuation creates freedom. Freedom from constant anxiety, freedom from rigid expectations, freedom to respond creatively to life's movements. The transformation of consciousness is not a single achievement, but an ongoing process. Each prayer deepens awareness slightly. Each moment of clarity builds upon the last. Over time, the cumulative effect becomes unmistakable. The inner world grows more spacious, more peaceful, more responsive. From this transformed inner state, outer circumstances are met with wisdom rather than struggle. Life is experienced as a dialogue rather than a battle. Prayer has done its deepest work, not by forcing change upon the world, but by awakening a consciousness capable of meeting the world with balance, insight, and quiet strength that continues to shape experience from within. Communion is the natural flowering of prayer when asking gives way to being. In communion, the soul no longer approaches the divine with a list of demands or expectations, but with an open heart, ready to offer itself completely. This offering is surrender, not as weakness, but as trust so complete that resistance dissolves. Surrender is the recognition that the limited self cannot see the full design of life, while the deeper intelligence within already moves toward harmony. In this recognition, prayer becomes intimacy rather than effort. Surrender does not negate individuality, it refines it. The ego's insistence on control softens, allowing a deeper will to guide action. This deeper will feels calm, spacious, and inclusive. It does not rush or coerce. When the soul surrenders, it does not stop acting. It stops struggling. Actions arise from clarity instead of compulsion. Life begins to feel less like a series of problems to solve and more like a path unfolding step by step. Communion grows through trust. Trust is cultivated by repeatedly letting go of the need to dictate outcomes. Each time the soul releases control and rests in awareness, it experiences a subtle reassurance. This reassurance strengthens confidence in the unseen process guiding events. Over time, the need for constant confirmation diminishes. The heart learns that it is supported even when answers are not immediately visible. In surrender, prayer becomes wordless, feeling replaces language. The heart communicates through presence rather than petition. This presence is attentive and loving, yet empty of demand. In such prayer, the soul does not ask to receive, but opens itself to what is already given. Peace arises not as a reward but as a natural state revealed when resistance ends. Communion transforms the sense of separation. The boundary between the one who prays and the one who is prayed to becomes thinner. Awareness turns inward and discovers a continuity that had been overlooked. This discovery changes the tone of life. One feels accompanied rather than isolated, guided rather than abandoned. Even solitude feels full, as though inhabited by a quiet companionship. Surrender also brings humility. The mind releases its need to appear certain or superior. There is a willingness to learn from experience rather than impose conclusions upon it. Mistakes are no longer threats to identity, but lessons contributing to growth. This humility opens the heart further, deepening communion. The soul becomes teachable, receptive to insight arising from within and through circumstance. As communion deepens, fear loosens its grip. Fear is sustained by the illusion of being alone and responsible for everything. Surrender reveals that responsibility is shared with a greater intelligence. This does not absolve effort but supports it. One still acts with care and intention, yet without the burden of anxiety. Effort becomes lighter, more focused, more joyful. In this surrendered state, guidance flows effortlessly. It is not always specific instruction, but an inner sense of rightness. Choices feel aligned or misaligned based on an inner resonance rather than external pressure. This resonance guides action subtly, steering life toward balance. Even when outcomes are uncertain, the soul feels oriented. Communion also refines desire. Desires rooted in fear or comparison gradually lose urgency. Deeper aspirations emerge, oriented toward meaning, understanding, and service. The heart begins to value inner harmony over outer accumulation. This shift simplifies life. Many unnecessary struggles fall away as priorities realign. Surrender reveals strength of a different kind. It is not the strength of resistance, but of flexibility. Like water adjusting to the shape of the riverbed, surrendered consciousness adapts without losing its essence. This adaptability allows one to meet change with grace. Loss is felt without bitterness. Gain is enjoyed without attachment. Emotional balance becomes more stable. In communion, prayer and listening merge. The soul rests in awareness, attentive yet relaxed. In this resting, insights surface naturally. They do not interrupt but emerge gently. One feels guided without feeling controlled. This balance preserves freedom while providing direction. Surrender also expands compassion. Recognizing one's own vulnerability opens understanding toward others. Judgment softens as the soul perceives shared struggles beneath differing behaviors. This compassion is not sentimental. It is grounded in awareness of common humanity. It expresses itself through patience, forgiveness, and kindness. As communion stabilizes, the need to constantly evaluate spiritual progress fades. The soul trusts its movement. Growth is recognized not by dramatic experiences, but by increased peace, clarity, and responsiveness. Life feels coherent even when complex. The inner relationship with the divine becomes steady, not dependent on mood or circumstance. Surrender reshapes the experience of effort. Work becomes an offering rather than a burden. Each task is approached with presence, allowing quality to replace haste. Results are received with gratitude, whatever their form. This attitude reduces exhaustion and increases fulfillment. Communion also reveals a deeper joy, independent of external success. This joy arises from alignment. When inner will and higher will feel unified, there is a sense of rightness that permeates experience. Even simple moments carry meaning. Silence feels nourishing rather than empty. As surrender deepens, prayer ceases to be an activity performed at certain times. It becomes a way of being. Awareness remains open, receptive, and trusting throughout the day. The heart stays turned inward even while engaged outwardly. This continuity sustains communion. In this state, life itself feels responsive. Challenges are met with curiosity rather than dread. Opportunities are recognized without grasping. The soul feels guided through a quiet confidence that does not need explanation. Communion matures into devotion without effort. Love for the divine presence becomes natural, not cultivated. It expresses itself through attention, integrity, and service. The sense of offering extends beyond prayer into every interaction. Surrender ultimately reveals freedom. Freedom from constant striving, freedom from fear of uncertainty, freedom from the illusion of separation. This freedom does not remove responsibility. It infuses it with meaning. In the depth of communion, the soul realizes that it has been seeking what was never absent. The act of surrender unveils a presence that was always within reach, patiently waiting beneath layers of effort and expectation, ready to guide, support, and receive the heart that rests in trust and quiet openness, continuing to unfold as an ever-deepening relationship, lived moment by moment through awareness and love.